The Picture of Dorian Gray is a Gothic novel written by Oscar Wilde and first published in its complete form in 1890. I'm not sure which version I read. I know that the very first publication of this book had about 500 words deleted without the author's knowledge by the publishers, who felt the book contained too much content which would offend book reviewers on a moral basis. There's a lot of philosophical discussion in the version I read which might have offended the public at the time, but even still there's a strange transition in the book from where Dorian is a kind of sweet and innocent young man to where he becomes known as a bit of a shady, dodgy character who is avoided by his contemporaries. Much of his depravity and debauchery is implied rather than spelled out. So either way, I'm not sure if I got the version with the 500 words taken out. I did some research and it seems as though much of what was taken out were references to a homosexual relationship between two characters, an implication which I did pick up on, and of Dorian's sexual relationships with women in high society, which is another thing which I did think did come through in the text, so I really don't know. So in this book, a man called Basil Hallward draws a painting of young Dorian Gray, a charming and interesting young man. Basil is also friends with someone called Henry Wotton, who he introduces to Gray. When Gray sees the finished portrait, an incredible work, he exclaims a kind of prayer, wishing something along the lines of wanting to look like the portrait forever, and instead of him becoming old and wrinkly, the portrait does in his place. And this is something that ends up coming true. As other characters age naturally, Dorian seems forever youthful. And with his looks, his wealth, and the negative influence of Henry, Dorian becomes a more morally repugnant character over time, and as he does so, to his initial horror, the portrait begins to look more and more evil, showing him directly the state of his corrupt soul. It affects him for years, with him keeping the portrait in secret and being forever linked with it, until the day comes when he finally hopes to change his ways and become a better man. I did really enjoy this novel. I found it to be quite spooky, like the descriptions of these subtle changes in the look of the portrait, like the evil smile that suddenly appears. Much of the book is psychological, and the issues the characters have are internalized, especially with Dorian. Not a lot happens, per se, because most of the action is going on in the characters' heads and minds. The book is most interesting when it concerns itself with Dorian and the portrait. There's a lot of waffling in the book, a lot of parts where rich, la-di-da kind of folk who can't stand each other deep down sit and eat dinner together, having painfully boring conversations with each other. And the worst offender for the boredom by far is Henry Wotton, who just goes on and on about such bullshit and nothingness, always getting in his non-mainstream viewpoints or anti-conformist opinions when he's having dinner or when he's with Dorian and Basil. The guy never shuts the fuck up, and all he does is say things that really, when you think of it, only seem to exist to cause the kind of controversy and offence that got the book censored in the first place. If his character was in a book today, they'd call him an edgy teenager, and I was so wanting for someone to just bitch slap this guy and tell him to shut up so the book could focus on the likes of Dorian. In some ways, the book feels like a proto-novel, like it's a precursor or a draft to a more meatier and fuller book. I know subsequent adaptations of the Dorian Gray character went and did different things with it, like in that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie where the portrait ages instead of showcasing his repugnant true self, and he can't look at it or he'll die. And obviously he'll be tempted to look at it because he wants to see what he really looks like. In this book he looks at it plenty, which provides us with ample scenes of him facing off against his true self, which the public do not see but only hear whispers about, and how he wrestles with the demon on the wall, often going to great lengths to justify his horrid actions. It's a very interesting book, an exploration into the power of vanity and life without consequence, a shallow society and a collection of characters hedonistic. Worth reading.